G'day everyone. Thought I'd pop in and have a quick discussion with you about an article that I've just found, which is really interesting. I just saw it appeared a few minutes ago. It might have been out for a while, I'm not actually sure, but it's an Fstopper announcement. So just pop in and say hi in the chat because I'd love to know who's actually here. It's Sunday, like I said, over in the US and Europe, so I'm not sure how many will pop in live for this. I'm just getting organised on the chat here. Let me just move this over a little bit. So if you are actually popping in live now, guys, just say a quick hi, just so I know who's here. Tom's here. Mr. YouTuber's here. G'day, mate. How you going? Yeah, got an interesting thing to talk to you all about, so I'm just going to give it a minute or so to make sure people are popping all in. CW Daly's here. G'day to you as well. Nice and cool day today here in Melbourne. Mick's here as well. I did a wedding too just to let you know, I did a wedding on Sunday again, Saturday again. It was amazing. It worked really well. Really challenging conditions that I actually shot in as well. Where they had the actual wedding ceremony was in very, very dim, sort of very, very moody lighting, and I'll show that to you all eventually, but the cameras just went amazing. I used the a7iii and the a9, and they didn't miss a beat. The focusing on those new cameras under harsh conditions is unbelievable. I also did a fusion video as well on the day, and everything went really great. I just wanted to basically report how good the focus actually is. Let's see who else is in here. Wayne's here as well. Rez is here. Good morning, David from Melbourne. I know it's pretty cool this morning, Reza. Jen is here from Hamburg. Scott's here as well. At the coast in a caravan. Oh, that'd be nice. Dominic's here. Alicia's here. Mario is also here from Canada. M. Spakes is here. And AL3KSG, I think it is. Cheerio, David. Mike's here. Thanks, Mike. Johnson City Aerial Photography said, good evening also from the US. Just to let you know too, I did just post another video of Kiara, guys, if you want to see that. I shot her with the 70-200. I really do love that lens. Let me know what you think about those when you have a look at that video, obviously after this. Richard's also here. I'm not going to be on for long. I just basically wanted to talk to you about this Fstopper article and just to see what people think, and obviously if you're not here live you can talk about it in the questions down below because it really is an interesting article. So I'm going to switch over to that article now just so you can see what I mean. So this is the article that was put up this morning, and it is Fstoppers, and I will come back to the questions, guys. This is actually the Fstoppers, and it was the actual heading that interests me here. Let me just make this smaller so that you can see this. I'll move it down a little bit. It says the heading that they've actually used here is the Sony a7iii might have ruined Canon's plans for their mirrorless system. And this is what I actually was curious to chat to you guys about, to see how you think about this. And obviously if there's any Canon people that are live in the chat, they can chime in, and obviously if you're not live in the chat, leave it in the comments down below and we'll have a discussion there as well. But basically there's this whole article. I'm not going to read the whole article with you, but I just want to bring up some points about this article to you because I did think, to be honest, I was very surprised when Sony released their a7iii with the specs that they did. It really did amaze me in the fact that they were giving something in some ways, and I will go back to this article, but this is also mentioned in the article as well, that Sony really have undercut a lot of their other cameras and caused this little bit of confusion about which one you would buy, because in some ways particularly the a7iii is better than the a7R2, and in some ways as well it's better than the a9. Particularly if you look at things like focusing, the focusing is better in the a7iii than it is in the a7R3. It also has better video features than the R3. It has a bit better dynamic range, and it's definitely better in low light, the ISO. And really, what they're saying here is it's interesting because Sony have really held nothing back. Now, they did previously hold things back when they had the a7 II. It wasn't a massive step up from the a7. They added IBIS, but there wasn't a huge difference between the two cameras really. But they really did add everything when they put out this camera, and I'm not sure whether that they're right in what they're saying here is this something in the line that Sony have said, well, you're now going to have to match us or better than what we already have. And it really has clearly shook the market up. And that's what I want to talk to you about this article, because it's really actually quite interesting. And just to sort of break this down when we're looking at it, they're just saying, has Canon left it a bit too late? I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll put the link to this down below so you can have a discussion down below about this after you've read this article. But they're basically saying in here that, that the Sony a7 III that was released really is not a base camera, an entry-level camera. They've thrown everything at this, and they're wondering about how Canon are going to actually target this and how they're going to challenge this, because I think what they're basically saying is that Canon probably were thinking about obviously releasing a mirrorless camera the same as what Nikon were, but Canon particularly have always held back a little bit. If you look at it, Canon have always protected their higher end video cameras. They really didn't want to give you anything near that lineup that could take away money from, say, their C200, something down that line. Sony haven't been so particular about that. They really have given you all the bells and whistles in the cheaper camera, particularly as they're getting up now, and God knows what's going to happen with the a7S III when that's released. I can't wait for that, and it's probably something I'll buy straight away. But what's that going to be? What are they going to give us in that camera? So, and this article, which I'll go back to in a minute, they're saying in there that they believe that Canon will hold back, or they were going to hold back on what they will be offering in their mirrorless cameras. And for things like what would the camera mount be? Are they going to make it so it's the mount that is used now, or are they going to make it a mount that you're going to have an adapter? I think initially they're saying that they probably were thinking that they'd have to have adapters. And the hard part for Canon here is that it's way easier for Canon shooters to move over to Sony than, say, it is for Nikon, for instance. So if Canon don't do the right thing when they release this camera, they clearly are going to be in trouble. Now, if you read this article, and like I said, I suggest to have a read of it once I stick the link down below, they're basically saying that they believe Canon were going to hold back, and that would be a real downfall of trying to, say, compete with Sony, because they're saying in this article that if they didn't release something that was good enough to compete with Sony, well, then clearly Sony users then may move over, and that would be game over. So they're in a real hard state here to sort of know which way to go. Someone's saying pink in the on the background, I think. I'll come back to questions soon, guys. Now, let's go through, so talking about what they're saying. They're saying that the basic model, I'll read it down here. Sony, on the other hand, seems to have different ideas than Canon. In other words, Canon have always protected their higher-end cameras. And particularly if they bring out new cameras, you look at the 6D Mark II. I mean, particularly if you look at new cameras, the 5D Mark 1V, they really do hold back in what they release in new features, whereas Sony haven't done that, particularly with this a7 III model. They're saying that Sony, on the other hand, seems to have different ideas, and their answer is the a7 III. The base model from Sony features an incredible amount of features, something not very common for entry-level full-frame cameras. Now, that's what I really thought was the interesting thing about this, was that Sony held nothing back with the a7 III. And like I said, I used it at a wedding on Saturday, and honestly, that camera is insane. I mean, you really don't really need anything else, to be completely honest. It really is incredibly good value. I know it's still $2,000 US, but you are getting an incredible camera for that price range. And clearly, Sony haven't really worried about protecting their FS5 series by releasing these latest cameras. They haven't been worried about that. They know that probably people are still going to buy those high-end cameras if they want them, but they're not holding back now, particularly on what they're offering on the lower end. And like I said to you, it particularly has given an issue with where do the Sony cameras even fit amongst themselves, because the a7 III is so good, you really have to make a judgment whether you'd like to go for the a7 III or the a9, for instance. And I've talked about that before, so I'm not going to go over all of that now, but clearly as an entry-level camera, they really have done an incredible thing. And this probably will hurt what Canon and Nikon have to do. So let's go back to this as well. So they're saying in here that the earlier versions of this, like the a7 III, there wasn't much of an upgrade from the original a7, except for a few improvements to the build design and the addition of IBIS, and I said that was the main thing. That's been now changed totally with the a7 III as an upgrade. And they're mentioning down here, which is what I spoke to you about, that the a7R III and the Sony a9 is cameras now that you're not sure sometimes which one you would go for because the a7 III is so good. And I probably agree with that. I still love the a9. It's still my favorite camera, but the a7 III is unbelievable. And they're actually saying that the noise low light performance actually rivals the a7S II in the a7 III, and it does. And I can tell you that the wedding that I shot on the weekend was incredibly challenging lighting, and it was unbelievable. The images are super clean. The focusing under that low light scenario was brilliant in both the Sony a7 III and the a9. So it's saying here, why does this impact Canon? Releasing something mediocre, and this is what they're actually saying, that it will probably cost Canon dearly now if they release something that's mediocre, because now they've got to compete with Sony. They do actually have to compete with that. And the problem for Canon is it does take sometimes a number of years before they build up. You think how long it's taken Sony to get from the a7 up to the a7 III and the a9. You know, there's a few camera generations in between there. Now, Canon really, even though they've released camera before, they haven't done full frame cameras, and they really have nothing that could compete with the Sony line. So I'm not certain that they can just pull the rabbit out of the hat and grab one instantly that's going to compete with Sony. But basically, they are going to be in trouble if they don't do this well enough, and this is what this article is talking about. They're saying that if they release something not significant now, it will cost them much more than they probably anticipated. And it says here, Canon is notorious for being reserved when it comes to new releases. And that's the problem with that. If you look at all of the latest releases from Canon, they have all been really mediocre releases, to be honest. Like the 16 Mark II really was a terrible release. The 5D Mark 1V was not that good either. If you look at how that does video, it's a terrible format that they're using there. Even though the camera side of it is still fairly good, it was still not a fantastic upgrade. Let's see what else they're saying through here. They're also saying that Canon, on the other hand, has a fully developed system. Oh, no, it's just saying, I'll go back to here. It says Canon is in a little bit of a quandary because they have a lot more to lose than Sony does. Sony as a company not only has a large enough budget to compete, because remember that Sony actually are a massive company as well. So they're saying that Sony not only does have enough money to compete, but they also take many more risks. And they do, and they're saying this is why we're seeing Sony throw as many features as possible into their cameras to stir up excitement. So clearly, Sony doesn't ever seem to worry about taking risks, and that's one of the very big differences between how Sony have released things and how, say, Canon or Nikon have, in the fact that they are willing to take those, basically, they may say, well, I'm going to give everything up like they have with the Sony a7 III. They're not worried about taking risks like the other two companies, who are much more conservative in the way that they think, and they are much more protective of their higher end line. Canon particularly, Nikon not so much so, but Canon particularly because they're protecting cameras like the C200. But let's keep going back to this. It's saying down here that it's true that Canon may be able to build a mirrorless system while using the EF mount as a crutch. So in other words, they're not sure about what type of mount that they'll actually use. And this is the interesting part about this. Like, are they going to use an adapter? Now, you can use those adapters on the Sony side, but the adapters never work as well, particularly in video, as what they will work in stills. So that's another interesting thing as well. So, it's quite interesting which way Canon will go. Will they make a bigger mirrorless body and then use the current lenses that are there And they're saying that they are still supporting those because they've just released the 85 1.4, and there was talk the other day about a new 70-200 lens, a couple of them. I think there was an f4 version and a Canon 70-200 f2.8, so there's a new version of that. They're also saying that they've just released two tilt shift lens, 3 new tilt shift lenses as well. So clearly Canon is still going to be supporting these other lenses, and it's going to be interesting to see which way they fall, because if they go all out in mirrorless, well then obviously the digital SLR side's going to suffer. If they're going to go out then and not support mirrorless enough, then the mirrorless side will suffer, and then they're going to lose people over to Sony. And it's a really interesting thing that they're going to have to tackle here. So I'm going to open up to questions, because I will share that document down below, because I'd love to know your thoughts about this. And we'll have a chat about that anyway now in the questions. So I'll bring it back and we'll have a look. Mario just said he just saw the video. Thanks, very nice. Yes, I just posted one of Kiara if you're interested just before this video. Actually, I wasn't intending to do this, but I saw that article and I thought I'd love to have a chat with you guys about it, because it's so interesting what's happening out there in the marketplace. Did you see Sony Alpha rumors? Look at the Sony 400. No, I haven't been on there yet. I will have a look sometime today. CW Daily said, I don't think that Canon is too late. I actually had a podcast discussion about the mirrorless cameras and we discussed this. Canon, I think, will fare well. Nikon may suffer a bit perhaps. Yeah, and it's just interesting to see which way they're going to go though here. And remember too, the interesting thing is that if Canon announced something at Photokina, and even Nikon announced something at Photokina, well then Sony may potentially drop the a7S III then. And who knows what that's going to have. It's a really interesting time that we're in at the moment. It really is. Sam said, hello, editing while listening to your beautiful voice in the background. Oh, thanks, Sam. Listening to that Aussie accent. Canon already has the M line. Yes, they have, but then look, let's be truthful about that. It's not very good. The focus on that is non-existent, basically, if you're dealing with 4K. The 4K footage is as soft as... I just don't think that M line really cuts the thing. And this is why I'm saying to you that Canon always seem to hold back. There's probably no reason why in that M line, the M50 or whatever it is, that they couldn't have given you all the features that they have in their higher end cameras with focus, with sharpness in 4K, but they've held back again. And this is why I'm saying to you, every time Canon release a camera, they tend to hold back. And I don't mean this to be bashing CW Daily of Canon. I want Canon to do well because I really want Sony to keep innovating. And that's the thing for me. If Canon disappeared, if Nikon disappeared, Sony would have no reason to innovate. And I don't want that. But I want basically Canon to pull their finger out of their backside and really start to look after their customers. Because if you look at that, their M cameras, they're terrible. They're crap compared to what Sony are offering. Scott said Sony has landed a knockout punch in the first round. Yeah, and I think that's probably the case. And clearly, look, you've got to look at the timeline. This camera has been developed a while ago, but it was interesting how when this has been released and what they've thrown at this camera, you know, did they see the writing on the wall and thought, well, we're just going to change the whole thing straight away? I'm Bounce here. G'day, mate. How you going? Ray said the walls are red, not pink. Oh, love it. Ray's just saying hi. Mike said, if the Canon mirrorless doesn't use EF natively, it's dead in the water. I know it's going to be interesting, isn't it, Mike, to see which way they go with this. It really is going to be interesting. I can use Canon L glass on my a7 III just as well. Actually, most of my lenses are Canon L. And like I said, the Canon L, it's much easier for Canon shooters to move over to the Nikon than it is the other way over. Than Nikon to move to Sony. Mike said what Sony did with the a7 III is a full-blown war. Any company that doesn't try to match that camera is dead. I know, it's really interesting. It really is an interesting time to be shooting Sony particularly. Barry's just saying hi. CW Daily said, I don't think Canon will use the EF mount natively in the camera. The M camera is already its mirrorless offering and seems they can stick a full frame sensor in there. It's going to be interesting, CW Daily, what they do though. Mike said that trickling out feature and holding back shit is the main reason I left Canon for Sony 4 years ago after 40 years of shooting Canon. And that was the exact same reason why I left Nikon, Mike. And, you know, clearly those companies are going to have to think about and change what they do. They're going to have to start to think about that. Roy Port said, I'm in love with my A9, so am I. I love that camera dearly. Francisco said, hi. So hi, Francisco. Dominic said, as a former Canon shooter, I was tired of waiting for the elusive Canon full-frame mirrorless. Now that I have a fully loaded Sony a7 III, I don't see myself going back. It's interesting. And like I said, I've never regretted moving from Nikon. I've never regretted it at all. Fathom Rocker said, yay. Mike said, CW Daily, of course they can, but there is no EF to M lenses. That will be a big mistake. Trev said, Canon are 4 generations behind in the mirrorless space, and by the time they release a body, it will be 5. Yeah, and then remember, that Sony will have released something new. So it's certainly interesting. James said they can't beat Sony at this point, and I really do hope, like I said to you, I really do hope it's a level playing field for everyone, because I want the A7 IV or whatever that comes out to be incredible again. So we really do need competition. I mean, we really do need competition. Where's the Coronas? That's only my live show, Ron. CW Daily said they will get that lineup eventually, just like Sony did in the beginning. Sony and Mike are having a discussion together that you could read. James said the Sony a7 III is a ridiculous camera. It is. Look, honestly, I know I always say that I shouldn't say that $2,000 is not a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money for what you're getting on that camera. When you think of what that camera is competing with and the features that camera offers, it's insane, really, the amount of features that Sony offered with that camera. It really is incredible. CW Day said, I know you aren't bashing David Oser, it's just really too early to count Canon out. Yeah, and I hope you're right, mate. I really do. We don't count them out until they are out. Trevor said Canon does skimp on new features and it allowed Sony an inroad. I know, and that's true. They really do need to change their thinking. They really do. Mike said, in my humble opinion, Sony next will go after the 80D and the D500, and the A6700 will do the same as they did with the A6000 and the A7 III. Yeah, they probably will add amazing features in the A6700 whenever that one's released. Yeah, I don't like that camera. I used it in the store for quite a while, and I didn't like it at all. It's so soft, CW Daily. The video image coming out of that camera is terrible. It looks mushy. It's awful. I didn't like it at all. And to hold back on 4K video autofocus is ridiculous. What they've done under that camera, it was ridiculous. MY YouTuber said, Canon lost me already. Poor mirrorless M launch and subsequent mirrorless and long product cycles. Yep. Yeah, and it is. The AL3 Ski, or I can't pronounce the name, says Nikon D850 is actually very good. It's a great camera, fantastic camera, but it's not something I'd want to shoot. I don't want to go back to those big cameras anymore. It's not for me, even though that's probably the best digital SLR that's ever been produced, that Nikon D850. It's not for me because of how big it is. Adam said, too little too late. The EOS M series has been out for years and have been rubbish. If they cannot improve on how they are going to build a great mirrorless camera, Trev said, compared to the compared to the A7 III, the Sony M50 is really garbage. Yeah, but look, you can't really compare the A7 III against the M50. Remember, that's only, what is it, $600, $700? You really should be comparing that to, say, an A6 300 or something. But the A6 300 kills that camera. It really does. I'm Flying Kiwi said, a pity Sony can't keep up with demand. Still 4 weeks of waiting for a total of 8 weeks. Yeah, I know. They really have been big demand for that camera. And just like the Tamron lens is going to have a massive demand as well. Francisco said, has someone tested the Canon 200 2.8L on Sony? No, I haven't. Scott said, Sony is like Bondi Beach, babe. Canon is like Dame The M50 I used in the camera store, yeah, it's soft. It was soft. It is cheap though. Like I said, it's not an expensive camera. Adam said, people say Canon has a much bigger lens lineup, but most are old and aren't optically up to the standard of the new Sony lenses. M. Spate said both Canon and Nikon are going to have to take lots of pictures of brick walls. The brick walls are still coming on. I love it. Oh, you guys crack me up, honestly. Ed Corona said, the real question is, will it render brick walls sufficiently? Well, this is what it's all about, isn't it? If you can't do that brick wall, you're not in the running. And clearly, Sony are shooting those brick walls amazingly. Mike said, if I were running Canon, the first thing I would do now is release all the L glass and E mount. Interesting. Serenity Photo said, I'd rather have an A6000 than an A... Yeah, they really, like I said, it's just, they've just held back too much. It's the video softness on that camera that really gets to me, and I just don't like it at all. I really don't like it. I know it's got some nice features, but it just sucks if you look at the video resolution. It looks really muddy to me. And like I said, holding back that focus in the 4K is an issue. Like I said, I don't want to be here too long because I wanted to make this a quick one. I will leave that document underneath in here. The brick walls are still going off. Please leave some comments down below because I'd like this discussion to keep going. Brick walls are for life. Oh, God. People are going to be watching this that don't know what on earth you guys are talking about because they won't have seen my other live show. What do you think of Nikon buying their way into the game by saying partnering with buying Fuji, for example? Well, that'd be interesting. I mean, Sony did it, didn't they? You never know. Francisco, A6000 is a killer starter camera. It is. It's still a great camera. Mike said, not their L glass. I use a lot of their... Oh, he's just answering someone else. That's all right. Mario said, hi, David. Hi to you all. Has just joined. Sam said, David... just like any corporation, if there's no competition from Nikon, Canon, Sony will not feel the need to keep investing. And that's why, Sam, I want these other companies to survive. Because it's important for all of us that these companies survive. Fuji, Panasonic, Canon, Nikon, all have to do well for Sony to keep innovating. And, you know, it really is an important thing to do. Have you seen Fro's terrible quality brick wall? That's what started me on this, Adam. That Frono's brick wall started me. Stop photographing brick walls. If Sony or Panasonic pull out all stops and implement ProRes, raw Canon will be toast. M. Spark said, talk as long as you want, David. The commentary is great. Now I'm going out for a coffee in a minute, guys. I've got to do some wedding editing. I can't stay here too long. CW Daly said Fuji would probably buy Nikon. Nikon is bleeding money. Fathom Rocker said brick walls justify my G Master purchase. You guys are great. Anyway, guys, I'm out of here because I want to get a coffee. Read that article. Post in the comments down below what you think about that as well, because I'd love to have a discussion on it. And please watch the video I just posted of Kiara as well, because I just posted one of Kiara a few minutes ago. So catch you guys. Have a great evening or day, whatever you're up to, and I'll see you all soon. Bye for now.